Good evening. A warm welcome also from my side, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you here and also to be able to introduce the all-new Prelude to you today. Okay, so let's deep dive into the Prelude content, starting with the grand concept. Now, the actual global development responsible chief engineer in Japan, Mr. Yamagami, he was actually inspired by a glider. And why a glider? Because a glider doesn't have any own propulsion, but when pulling nature on its side and to take advantage, a glider can also travel very long distances. So a glider is also somewhat a symbol of efficiency. But a glider can also perform very acrobatic movements. There are real air shows showing these acrobatic performance of a glider. This means a glider also incorporates the duality between dynamic performance and also the efficiency, but also a smooth glide. So that is exactly the philosophy Yamagami-san wanted to express with the Prelude, and that's why the glider became the Grand Concept Association. Now we have basically three pillars. Of course, we want to continue the heritage. We want to develop from the past, but also we want to provide the most important attribute of a car, which from Honda's perspective is the joy of driving. And then the hope for the next generation also to fulfill these expectations with versatility and environmental compatibility. Let's have a look at the exterior design. Again, here, the concept was a gliding cross stance. Again, the glider. On one hand, the proportions, low and wide, with a low center of gravity. But also the surfaces, as you can see, is designed very plain and clean, associated with the glider. And the stance, and this is not just the low and wide proportion, but also the so-called aspect ratio, which is the ratio between the body and the window part, has been tuned and optimized in direction sporty appearance. Here are some details. So we have the narrow profile front grille in order to express that significant and distinctive nose design. We've also used the laser brazing technology again in order to connect the side panel and the roof without having that groove in the roof. We could also get rid of the shark fin antenna by actually printing the antenna directly on the rear window, and we have full LED headlights front and rear in order to express that horizontal oriented design. Here some dimensions. The overall length of 4,515 millimeter. This is actually slightly smaller than the last generation Prelude, the fifth generation. But although the outer dimension has become smaller, we have more space for the inner passenger. So the actual tandem distance, as we call it, which is the distance from the front hip point to the rear hip point, has increased by 50 millimeter. Again, a proof that Honda is strictly following their development principle of man maximum, machine minimum. We have also some emblematic lighting effect. Of course, from the front, we are expressing this spreading of wings associated from the glider, but also in the rear, we are emphasizing the wide stance of the Prelude. There are quite some interesting features also incorporated in the lens. In the front, we have some V-grooves in the lens in order to create a very distinctive light dispersion. And in the rear, at daytime, we have a double line design, and when the light is lit, we have a very bright single line design, again to emphasize that horizontal orientation. Here's some accents. on one hand, the black chrome louver for the grille, but we also have some blue accents, both front and rear. So these lines here, they actually indicate and associate an airflow which is flowing under the vehicle body. And we have also painted now the Brembo brake calipers completely in blue. There are 4 colors available in Europe, whereas this Moonlit White Pearl is a completely new color, also for Honda. It has a very strong shading effect by orienting the pigments in the paint, and this is actually reinforcing the effect of that 3D sculpted design to give some depth and 3D effect. Let's move over to the interior. Again here, the concept was a gliding cockpit in order to create personal space for driver and passenger. We have on one hand the D-shaped steering wheel, so that's the first thing you will see once sitting behind the steering wheel, and then the very intuitively operatable Sport HMI. The center console is designed symmetrically, and that is also the way we have now created a very personal space for driver and passenger. In the interior, we have basically 2 color combinations. We have the blue stitch and the white interior, and then we have the blue stitch and the black interior. The color combination blue and white expresses more the duality between novelty and nostalgia, whereas blue and black express clearly a sporty direction. In the front, on the dash, it's a very interesting texture we've been using there. It's called the cloud texture, but if you feel the surface feels, in my opinion, a little bit like the traditional Japanese paper with the washi, and on this the Prelude signature is being stitched. Again, a very nice design feature. Looking at the front seats, this is also quite unique because they are differently designed for passenger and driver. For the driver, we have made a stiffer side support. The side support cushion is also higher and also reinforced with some inner wires in order to give a better side support when driving through winding roads. But for the passenger, we've reduced the height of the side cushion for better ingress and egress, and also the cushion itself is slightly softer for better ride comfort. Now let's talk about the powertrain, the heart of the all-new Prelude. And you might have heard it is the 2-motor hybrid system, the EHEV hybrid system, with a maximum output of 184 PS. This is defined by the drive electric motor, which also produces a maximum torque of 315 Newton meter. The energy supply has been performed by the 2-liter direct injection Atkinson cycle petrol engine, and the battery pack has 72 cells. The new Prelude also has 3 drive modes, as you might know from other Honda models, whereas the well-balanced normal mode is now called the GT mode. GT stands for Grand Touring, where all the attributes is very well balanced. And from there, you can actually switch and also sharpen the performance to sharp, where response, so powertrain response, but also handling characteristics, steering characteristic, and also engine sound is being tuned in direction sporty driving. And you can also turn down to comfort, where also the ride, but also the sound and steering is being tuned for a relaxed driving for long distance traveling. On top of these 3 drive modes, the Prelude also incorporates a 4th modes, the so-called individual mode. Here you can actually combine the 6 parameters to your preference in order to customize a setting which suits your preference. What is also new on the new Prelude is that we have 6 deceleration levels in total, which you can change and also select with the shift paddles behind the steering wheel, up to a very strong deceleration level, which is more or less equivalent to one pedal driving. But you can also operate with the right-hand side paddle, which is analog to a shift up for automatic transmissions. If you operate that once from the default, then you will end up in the so-called coasting mode. So this is just like you have shifted into neutral and you roll out towards, for example, a red traffic light, and you can control the speed solely by the brake pedal. Now, if you apply brake pedal in that situation, you still apply regenerative braking, so no recuperation is being lost. You can also lock and fix the deceleration rate. For that, just hold the left-hand side lever for 2 seconds, and then the small M will appear in the display, and now you can actually select the deceleration level to your preference, and this will be kept and held for the entire driving cycle. And to unlock or to release this mode, operate the right-hand side, so the shift up side, for 2 seconds, and then it will release the lock mode. Now, let's move over to the Honda S Plus Shift feature. You might have heard some of these features already in the internet. It is a very sporty perception you will receive when switching on the Honda S Plus Shift. You can hear, you can see, and you can also feel the powertrain. So this is a feature, as we call it, in order to communicate with the engine. So the first thing which will happen if you switch on the S Plus Shift is that the conventional power meter on the left-hand side dial in your instrument panel will turn into a real tachometer with nice serrations and also the gear position display in the center. And the RPM, the engine speed, which is displayed here, is the real engine speed of the combustion engine. It's nothing calculated or simulated, but this is the real engine speed. Now, what happens if you activate S Plus? The base mode, the base control already provides a certain shifting simulation. So if you, for example, accelerate with the Civic or with the ZR-V you've been using to come here to the hotel, there is a certain shift up mechanism which is performed, but once you release the throttle and once you run into EV driving mode, basically nothing happens anymore. Now, if you select S Plus Shift, then this shifting up will become more pronounced. The engine is revving up higher and it's really pulling each gear up to higher RPMs. This is also orchestrated with a little bit more engine sound, and this will become even more sporty if you change, for example, from comfort to GT or to sport mode in the drive mode settings. What the S Plus also does is not just shifting up, but now if you decelerate, it also simulates a shift down. A shift down even with rev matching, so the actual heel and toe sensation can be experienced with the S Plus Shift. The S Plus Shift actually simulates a 8-speed automatic transmission. Now, I told you that you can hear it and you can see it, but you can also feel the simulated gear shifts, because in this moment when the engine is decoupled from the wheels and the car is actually driven by the electric motor, We, we can actually do whatever with the engine. We could even play a melody with the engine if we wanted to. But instead of doing that, we are actuating the simulation of the shift ups and the shift downs. So with the electric motor, we can now also simulate so-called gear shift shocks. So when shifting up, you will experience a slight shock, and also when shifting down, you will experience a slight shock. And this is so natural that you really forget very quickly that you're driving an EHEV hybrid powertrain, where basically only one ratio is existing, but you get the feeling you're driving an 8-speed automatic transmission or a DCT transmission. So that's really, really nice. Here again, an overview of what happens if S Plus shift is being activated in combination with the drive modes. So as we have three drive modes plus the individual, so you have in total 2 times 4, this means 8 different settings you can set according to your preference. And I am really recommending you tomorrow, please try the S Plus shift in the sports mode, because that is really a highly dynamic sensation. Now, speaking of dynamics, before I go into detail, I just would like to emphasize that when the Prelude was introduced in the internet and that sporty design was disclosed, later on also some specifications were announced. They had started a very strong conversation in the internet that 184 horsepower for that sporty looking car is not sufficient. And many people ask for 250 horsepower, which is necessary for the Prelude. Now, what do they mean with 250 horsepower? And for that, I had a look at the power and torque characteristic of a combustion engine and an electric motor. And this is displayed here. So on the left-hand side, the power and torque characteristic of a conventional petrol engine is shown. As you can see, the blue line indicates the torque. The torque increases with engine speed and will find its maximum somewhere mid-range, and then will drop again. And the so-called output, or the power, this is just a very strictly proportional equation between torque and engine speed. So power is engine speed multiplied by torque. So the engine speed will rise according to engine speed. The engine power will rise according to engine speed and torque, and then it will find its maximum somewhere up there, slightly below red zone. Now, modern petrol engines with 250 horsepower, they usually produce something around 300 Newton meter of torque. Now, when do you actually experience the maximum power of 250 horsepower? I mean, try to do that in first gear, for example. You rev up the engine, but then you will run into rev limit because you have way too much horsepower for that situation. You can do that in second gear, third gear, fourth gear, fifth gear. It will happen the same. At a certain point, you will run into rev limit and you need to shift up. So the only situation where you actually experience the 250 horsepower maximum output is at top speed, because that's the point where you balance the output of the engine against the driving resistance. But that's just constant driving, so not really dynamic. The dynamic performance of a car, this is defined and predominantly also described by the torque. This is what you feel. This is which is relevant for the acceleration. Now, if we look at an electric motor, and due to its physical constitution, if we run the maximum electric current through the windings of the rotor, the maximum torque is available straight away, so from start. And it will be kept constant and at mid-range it will drop. So the actual output curve will look like this. And the reason why an electric motor has basically less output than compared to a conventional petrol engine is that the torque characteristic is looking like that, so that it drops quite quickly at mid-range. But the 300 Newton meter, which is actually demanded from people asking for a powertrain of 250 PS, this is actually also provided with our EHEV hybrid powertrain, because that is actually providing the 300, even 315 Newton meter to be precise, which also determines the acceleration performance. To have 300 Newton meter of instant torque, this brings completely different challenges. For example, torque steer. Just imagine that 300 Newton meter pulling against the front wheels while you're trying to hit the apex. But also the traction. If you accelerate in a corner, if the traction is losing grip, then of course VSA will interact and this will limit the output. It has been a slogan from a different company, but I really love the expression "power is nothing without control," and this is so suited for this situation, because all that power is completely useless if you cannot bring the force down to the ground. And in the past, we used to have exactly that challenge already. And if we remember, we had that challenge with the Civic Type R. And with the Civic Type R, we used a lot of sophisticated technology to bring the power down to the ground. And that is also the reason why we are using exactly the same suspension of the Civic Type R also for the new Prelude. We are using the dual axis strut front suspension, which minimizes the center offset in order to eliminate torque steer. We are using a high caster angle front suspension. Caster angle is the angle of the strut to the driving direction. And with that geometry, if we increase steering angle, actually the suspension is increasing also the camber angle. The camber angle is the angle to the side. And this brings a lot of stability. Just imagine if you have been pushed from the side, what you do is you step aside. So you're actually increasing the camber angle of your legs, and that is exactly what the Prelude suspension is also doing. This brings more stability while cornering. The adaptive damper system, I think this speaks for itself. This controls the dynamic wheel load distribution to all four wheels in an optimum way, so that high grip can be maintained for all four wheels at any time. The adaptive damper system works with 4 stroke sensors, which monitor the movement of the suspension in real time, and the 3 G sensors in XYZ 3 directions. Talking about the spring rate of the Prelude, the spring rate is set right between the Civic Type R and the Civic in order to have a good balance between dynamic performance and ride comfort. And the damping force of the adaptive dampers, they are controlled in a way that the Sport and the GT mode are quite close together, whereas when you shift into comfort mode, the damping force is significantly reduced in order to maintain a good ride comfort. Also the AHA, the Agile Handling Assist, maybe you remember, this is a system which applies slight braking of the inner wheels in order to create a yaw movement and then initiates the turn of a car very responsively. So this is the same effect you have when you put out your leg when going down a hill on a sleigh and you want to change direction, you do that with your leg. This is basically the same principle. And we have actually increased the operation range from the current system, which starts operation only once the brake phase is finished. We have increased the operation range into the area where brake is still applied. So that actually brings and pulls the car closer to apex at an early stage so that you have a way better line traceability. This system can also be used in order to stabilize the car in an emergency avoidance of obstacles, for example, also increasing the safety of the car. This is an overview of all chassis technologies which has been applied to the Prelude. The dual axis strut suspension adaptive damper, we already talked about. The high rigid steering system, which is also a carryover of the Civic Type R. We are using also uniform rigidity drive shafts. Drive shafts usually have different lengths and therefore also are different in rigidity. But in this case, we have designed the drive shafts despite different length in same rigidity again to compensate and eliminate torque steer. The Brembo brakes, I think they are needless to explain. We also found very good tires, a Continental Performance Contact 6, Premium Contact 6 tires, which bring a very good balance between rolling resistance and grip. Also, the body is used in order to increase the comfort. So we don't make everything just rigid. We make it only rigid where it's necessary. The side panels that are very important to maintain a high geometrical stability for the suspension parts. But we use the roof intentionally as part of the overall spring rate of the vehicle body in order to absorb uneven inputs from road surfaces. Last but not least, safety. As you might know, Honda is following and also targeting zero fatalities in traffic accidents involving Honda vehicles by the year 2050. And in order to achieve that ambitious goal, we are working and we are also improving passive and active safety technologies on a daily basis. But these technologies, of course, need to be serving the driver. This means it needs to be also a useful technology and may not interfere too much in also the pleasure of driving. So it should be thoughtful but still intimate driving support in order to provide a peace of mind for both driver and passenger. From this respect, the new Prelude incorporates all the state-of-the-art advanced driver assist systems, the Honda Sensing, which you also know from the Civic. Whereas these three features here, the road departure mitigation system, the adaptive cruise control, and the lane keep assist system, they have been newly calibrated, particularly optimized for the Prelude. Me personally, I like the new road departure mitigation system very much. To be honest, this is one of the functionalities I would love to switch off once I enter a car, which of course I don't do. I don't switch it off. But the new system of the Prelude is really decent. So it is not that intrusive as you might know it from other systems. And it even helps me to find the right line and also to bring me closer to the apex as if it knew where's the racing line. And if you're then sometimes too close to the center line, it gives you some feedback with a high frequency vibration in the steering wheel, which feels exactly like hitting the curbs in a racetrack. So this is very natural and also very decent. You will definitely find out tomorrow while driving. G-con-based collision safety body. This also, maybe from the name of Advanced Compatibility Engineering, the ACE body structure, which tries also to absorb crash energy from the collision opponent in order to maximize the survival compatibility between yourself and also the collision opponent. And really last not least, this is also a new functionality, the post-collision brake system. As we know from statistics that more than half of accidents on public roads, they are caused by multi-collision accidents. This means after the initial impact, there is a secondary impact which is causing heavy injuries or even fatalities. So we tackle these 55% by applying brake and brake lamp in order to bring the car to a complete and also safe controlled stop to avoid a secondary impact. Now, before handing over to Sarah, who will provide you also with some housekeeping information for tomorrow, let me briefly summarize the all-new Prelude. And I have to admit, I was also one of those who was a little bit concerned when I heard the Prelude will have just 184 horsepower. But once I drove the car, I was proven completely wrong. And this is really a car which cannot be described and judged by numbers and figures. So I'm also asking you not to judge this car by its cover, but really to drive the car and make your own opinion. And when driving the car, I recognize the brakes are really razor sharp. The steering feels like driving on rails, and the adaptive damper, they maximize the grip of all wheels in real time. And the powertrain, as I explained, it has always maximum drive force, and you're always in the right gear because you have only one gear. But in this one gear, you have always maximum drive force. So I hope you will recognize the quality of the Prelude as I did. I've been a Honda test driver for 30 years, and I've also been participating in the Nürburgring 24-hour race for 13 times. So from that perspective, I would consider my driving skill slightly above average, but I was just able to sense a hint of the limit performance of the Prelude. And I hope you, as probably a way better driver than me, will experience the real qualities of the Prelude tomorrow. Only one remark, stay away from the curves because the car feels very handy and also very agile. So it actually feels way smaller than it actually is. So we already had unfortunately, quite some damage of the wheels from your previous journalist. So that's the only thing you might have to keep in mind when driving. So I'm also looking very much forward to hear your opinions and your feedback tomorrow at lunch stop. And I'm really curious to know whether somebody will come to me and says the car needs more power. Thank you very much.